Hello and welcome to today's Fat Tail Daily video. Today I am joined by our resident resource expert, James Cooper. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Woody. Great to be back.
Good, good. Now, you are talking about China and how it looks to be imminently surpassing the US as the economic superpower of the world. Now, you start your article with quite an interesting story of Warren Buffett, who is obviously a great, talented investor. But you said it's quite interesting to note that when he started his investing career, that was at the very beginning of the US's domination economically and globally in the 20th century. How much do you think that backdrop it actually helps investors succeed over a longer period of time? Because I think it's a good little starting point to today's discussion.
Yeah, okay. So I think I drew on Warren Buffett because I just see him as the icon of American capitalism. He is the sort of epitome of sort of American growth over the last what is it, 60, 70 years. So I mean, he is getting on in years. He's had an incredibly successful career. Anyone who's sort of argued against Warren Buffett has sort of just vanished into the shadows. He's just seen it all, and he's put everything behind American investment and corporation, and that's been his big bet over the last 60 to 70 years, and that's paid off in a big way. And anyone that's sort of come along and said, okay, America's maybe getting a little bit tired, it's maybe reaching a peak, has really been proven wrong against this incredible growth over several decades. And I guess I was using sort of the Warren Buffett, the epitome of American growth and capitalism over this great period of growth, as perhaps an example that maybe we are reaching an important transition from what we sort of said as American hegemony. So where America's had this incredible era of growth, and that's really thanks to its sort of economic dominance. It's been the leading economic power for since about World War II, and it's also had the largest military, and all these things have filtered down to sort of the corporation level, which has really been a big advantage for American corporates and for Warren Buffett's bet on America over that time.
Mm.
But as we'll discuss in a little bit, I think there are some real reasons to think that maybe we're finally starting to see maybe a shift or something different that's not just all about America.
I was going to say, you suggest that China is poised to become the world's largest economic superpower. Now, that's not necessarily in and of itself a new idea. I mean, even when China awakened in the early 2000s and became, started driving up its manufacturing sector, and obviously helped Australia too get through the GFC. But it's not necessarily a new idea that China is going to eventually be the economic superpower of the world. But it's probably, we can say, getting closer. So I was going to ask you, what specific indicators or trends do you see that support this prediction, and how might this shift impact global financial systems?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to say I'm not a China expert. I'm a geologist. I'm a resource guy, but China is such a critical aspect to demand. So it is really important to just do as much analysis as we can and try to understand the China story, and how that maybe fits into this sort of change in power status between or from America to China. So some analysts predict that China will become the number one superpower by the mid 2030s. So that's not far away. But I think it's going to be more than just this symbolic shift. I think you kind of have to think about what that entails. So for America, being number one has meant having this sort of control over a world currency system, so the US dollar. But it's also had a lot of control over the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, ASEAN, so all these global organizations which are really help drive that American hegemony, that global power or influence. And I think as China steps up to that number one position, that's when you'll start to see that shift away from America. So, as you said, the last 2 decades, when people think about Asia, it's been this growth center, maybe a place where you speculate. But I think the really important point now for China is the fact that it is not just this sort of growth center. It's going to be the sort of power center or the new global influencer, that role that America has played and which has really filtered into this sort of unfair advantage that a lot of American companies have had, and Warren Buffett's stellar performance. So I think that's where the power shift could really could start to evolve, where you kind of maybe see more opportunities in that Asia sphere. So not just China. I mean, China would be the leader in terms of sort of its role as the sort of power center, the Middle Kingdom. But then how that would then filter out to all the surrounding countries like Indonesia, India, Thailand, all these other growth centers. So I think like never before, you've got this sort of threat to American hegemony, and I think that's huge opportunities for Asia and Australian investors.
Yeah, you do mention countries, particularly Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Korea, and India, that how they could benefit from China's rise. Can you elaborate at all on why these countries are well positioned to capitalize on this changing of the power guard, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. Again, I'm not a China or Asia or demographic expert, but a lot of these countries have really favorable demographics. I know a lot has been spoken about China not being favorable because of its one-child policy, but then these surrounding countries, like Indonesia especially, which is a huge population. The average population is, I think it's in its sort of early 20s, so the average age of the population. So I think these favorable demographics, huge growth potential, and I think it's really an opportunity for Australian investors just based on a geographic position. Um, and I think when you sort of tie all that together with the sort of the the power shift from America to China, and then the neighboring countries which have this huge growth potential that are surrounding China, I think that's where there's enormous opportunity. But it's just trying to distill it as an investor, and how do you actually play that is probably the really difficult part.
Well, let's just end the chat on how investors do play it. Now, your beat is obviously commodities and resources. Is that where you see this power structure benefiting Australia and Australian investors in that sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think commodities is really where you sort of can tap into the growth opportunities, because that's where what we saw in China with infrastructure, iron ore, copper, aluminium. But and I certainly wouldn't be the first to say this, that perhaps maybe that infrastructure boom is past, but that's where you maybe see other commodities come to the fore. So um, things like we've spoken about, critical minerals. So this is if China's going to be a consumer-led population, which is going to be demanding a lot more tech infrastructure. So that's where you could see critical metals like lithium, so the car industry, automotive industry, really driving demand for that commodity in the years ahead. I know we've seen a big pullback in lithium prices, so opportunities there. I think other rare earths, I think all the sort of graphite, those sort of critical metals, but also copper. Copper's just such a key metal for electrification. Um, it's sort of got this dual purpose because it's traditionally used for infrastructure, but it also has a critically important component for electrification. So building out the power grids and um, uh, energy transition. So it's a multi-use commodity which doesn't have any sort of alternative. Maybe aluminium, it could be used in some sort of copper aspects, but I think focusing on those commodities, maybe not iron ore specifically, that's probably had its peak, but it's certainly looking at critical metals would be the way forward. I think if you're thinking about the Asia as a growth center and which metals could benefit from that.
Final question, which I just thought of as you were talking. I was watching an interview with the Economic Club of Chicago and Donald Trump just yesterday, and just got me thinking about the US election and who, I mean, I don't, who knows who's going to win it, but do you think that will have any impact on on all this, or will it bring forward the transition of China being the more dominant power, or will it extend it out a bit longer? Because I know, for one, Trump, for example, he's really favourable on high tariffs. For it, will that affect any balance of specifically towards resources, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Trump's really set off the trade tariff against China and that sort of trade war. So I think if he was to come back into power, I don't see any easing of that, and also I don't see any easing if Harris was to come through. So I think that, again, that's where critical minerals could have some favourable tailwinds as the supply chains start to weaken between China and America, and you're looking for alternative suppliers. Um, I guess another aspect to that outside the US elections is the fact that you've got these rate cutting cycles happening um, from east to west. So America, the US, Europe, and China simultaneously cutting rates. So I think um, when people have looked at the energy transition and back in sort of 2022, 23, this is when you saw a boom in lithium, and that was sort of just as the rate hiking cycle was starting. So I think um, that boom started to tail off when interest rates started to rise. So I think if we see rate cuts, the appetite for the energy transition might come back because the cost of living crisis starts to sort of diminish, and the cost to go into these renewables might start to um, sort of pick up steam again. So rate cuts could be the big benefactor, which sort of sees a sort of pivot back to critical minerals.
Fascinating. All right, James, we'll leave it there. If you would enjoyed this chat and you would like to read James's full piece today, just head over to our website. The link is below. And of course, as always, sign up to Fat Tail Daily for more insights each day of the week. James, thank you very much for your time. I'll speak to you next week.
Thanks again, Woody. Cheers.